Good to see you. And thank you to Delphine Herbert for the opportunity to address this Friday the 13th Friday forum. What could go wrong inside of that?
Not a thing.
This is a forum, so this is not going to be dominated, I hope, by me lecturing, although I do have some preliminary remarks to make and share a good bit of information. My objective with this topic that Delphine offered is not to come down on a particular answer with respect to mental health and moral, ethical, and I'll add now, legal accountability, responsibility and accountability. It's to hopefully expand the topic for those who have agreed to come and be here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a bit and then open it up for general discussion. Does that work okay with everybody? Because I really do want it to be a forum. I'm not a bully pulpit on my part. Again, there's enough opportunity to do that on any given Sunday. Now, can everybody hear okay? If you can't, we'll talk with Bruce and ask him to turn the volume up. Okay?
I think we're good.
The first thing, the very first, and maybe one of the most important things that I need to convey is that I am not a mental health practitioner. I need to convey that fact because I am advised by my wife, Dr. Annette Albert, who is a retired psychologian. We use that term in our house because I'm the local theologian and she's the local psychologian, either that or I'm the local theologist. Her concern is that the measure of understanding that I do have about mental health means that I could find myself in deep water far from land, and she's probably right. By the same reason, however, I might say that given that I'm the only one in the family who has taught ethics on undergraduate and graduate levels, that she would be advised to keep her counsel to herself with respect to morals and ethics. And she's not here, which will most certainly not fly given her capacities as a critical thinker and an extremely principled person. So I ask your indulgence with respect to the fact that I am not a mental health professional and or practitioner. I suspect that some of you are far more fluent than I am, so your input today in the forum will be seminal. I hope that our time together will equip us with broader ideas and contexts with which we can understand mental illness and moral ethical responsibility. A broader look at the topic leads handily to the question, if a person is mentally ill, however, it might be indexed by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There it is, the DSM-5, the latest edition of that. Is that person accountable for the immorality, the lack of ethics, and perhaps even the illegal act? And to what degree is that person accountable for immoral, unethical, and perhaps illegal acts? Most everybody here has heard of the insanity defense, right? And from the womb of all knowledge, Wikipedia, I draw this brief definition. The insanity defense, also known as the mental order defense, is an affirmative defense by excuse in a criminal case, arguing that the defendant is not responsible for his or her actions due to an episodic or persistent psychiatric disease at the time of the criminal act. This is contrasted with an excuse of provocation, in which the defendant is responsible, but the responsibility is lessened due to a temporary mental state. Now, this defense reaches all the way back to the Code of Hammurabi and is embedded in current law among most nations of the world, specifically articulated as lack of mens rea. Bill, you and I have talked about that recently. The lack of a guilty mind is what that means. Right about here, I should also state that I don't have a degree in law or criminology, a fact today for which maybe I ought to feel guilty, but that would prove my point. 3 quick cases on the extreme edge of the debate about the insanity defense. First, a Texas mother who admitted to killing her 2 special needs children because she wanted, quote, normal kids, end quote, was not guilty by reason of insanity. Case number 2, a California man who shot his estranged wife's friend and beat her severely was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Case number 3, an Iowa teenager who killed his 5-year-old foster brother with a brick was found not guilty by reasons of insanity. These cases force us to face the reality of the insanity defense and raise many questions, such as, what does it mean to be not guilty by reasons of insanity? Do you have to be a raving lunatic or just be mentally disturbed? Third, do you have to be diagnosed? Fourth, do personality disorders count? Fifth, how is a jury with no medical experience qualified to determine if someone is insane? These touch on the field of forensic psychology as it informs criminology and so forth, but examples exist with respect to personal, interpersonal, and social behavior. Case number 1, the person who, due to a disorder such as narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, lies and or otherwise prevaricates with no sense of personal, relational, or professional responsibility. Second, the person who, because of child abuse or molestation as a child and youth, now bullies and threatens, short of causing actual physical harm, but still causes harm within the parameters of causing grave distress to others. Third, the person who, because of a neurological anomaly, such as cerebral trauma, is simply unable to discern right from wrong. And let me add this one. The far greater number of people who aren't diagnosed as having some mental or neurological disorder, yet continue to injure with harmful, dehumanizing behaviors and attitudes towards others and take no effort to curb them, such as racists, sexists, homophobes, xenophobes, those who have observed bully behavior yet take no steps to stop the bullying or to defend the person who is bullied. I offer another situation as described by Father Thomas Merton in his collection of essays, Raids on the Unspeakable. The essay titled A Devout Memory of Adolf Eichmann, in which Merton writes, and forgive me for the length of this quotation, and for anyone who would like, I will be happy to email you the entire essay. I'm picking and choosing from the essay to make it a little briefer. Merton writes, one of the most disturbing facts that came out in the Eichmann trial was that a psychiatrist examined him and pronounced him perfectly sane. I don't doubt it at all, and that's precisely why I find it disturbing. If all the Nazis had been psychotics, as some of their leaders certainly were, their appalling cruelty would have been in some sense easier to understand. It is much worse to consider this calm, well-balanced, unperturbed official conscientiously going about his desk work, his administrative job, which happened to be the supervision of mass murder. He was thoughtful, orderly, unimaginative. He had a profound sense of respect for system, for law, for order. He was obedient, loyal, faithful, a faithful officer of a great state. He served his government very well. The sanity of Eichmann is disturbing. We equate sanity with a sense of justice, with humaneness, with prudence, with the capacity to love and understand other people. We rely on the sane people of the world to preserve it from barbarism, madness, destruction. And now it begins to dawn on us that it is precisely the same ones who are the most dangerous. It is the same ones, the well-adapted ones, who can, without qualms and without nausea, aim the missile and press the buttons that will initiate the great festival of destruction that they, the same ones, have prepared. What makes us so sure, after all, that the danger comes from a psychotic getting into a position to fire the first shot in a nuclear war? Psychotics will be suspect. The sane ones will keep them far from the button, for sure. No one suspects the sane, and the sane ones will have perfectly good reasons, logical, well-adjusted reasons, for firing the shot. They will be obeying the sane orders that have come sanely down the chain of command. And because of their sanity, they will have no qualms at all. When the missiles take off, it will be no mistake. We can no longer assume that because a man is sane, he is therefore in his right mind. The whole concept of sanity in a society where spiritual values have lost their meaning is itself meaningless. A man cannot be sane in the limited sense that he is not impeded by disordered emotions from acting in a cool, orderly tier according to the needs and dictates of the social situation in which he finds himself. He can be perfectly adjusted. God knows, perhaps such people can be perfectly adjusted even in hell itself. And so I ask myself, what is the meaning of a concept of sanity that excludes love, considers it irrelevant, and destroys our capacity to love other human beings, to respond to their needs and their sufferings, to recognize them also as people, to appreciate their pain as one's own pain? Evidently, this is not necessary for sanity at all. No, Eichmann was sane. The generals and fighters on both sides in World War II, the ones who carried out the total destruction of entire cities, these were the same ones. Those who have invented and developed atomic bombs, thermonuclear bombs, missiles, who have planned the strategy of the next war, who have evaluated the various possibilities of using bacterial and chemical agents. These are not the crazy people. These are the sane people. The ones who coolly estimate how many millions of victims can be considered expendable in a nuclear war. I presume they do all right with the Rorschach inkblot tests. On the other hand, you will probably find that the pacifists and the ban-the-bomb people are quite seriously, just as we read in Time magazine, a little crazy. I am beginning to realize that sanity is no longer a value or an end in itself. The sanity of modern man is about as useful to him as the huge bulk and muscle of the dinosaur. If he were a little less sane, a little more doubtful, a little more aware of his absurdities and contradictions, perhaps there might be a possibility of his survival. But if he is sane, too sane, perhaps we must say that in a society like ours, the worst insanity is to be totally without anxiety, totally sane. End of So the ink blot thickens. But it should be noted that defense by reason of insanity is very rarely accepted in the United States, and it is dropping. Current trends in behavioral sciences appear to be leaning towards the concept guilty by reasons of insanity as opposed to innocent by reasons of insanity. The pair mediating each other by reduced sentences in case of criminal acts on one hand and reluctant tolerance on the other. More specifically, the unsettling and unsettled question is this: does some sort of dividing line exist between what we generally understand as mental illness and moral ethics on the other hand? Or you can feel free to reverse that order. Is there some kind of dividing line between morals and ethics on one side and mental illness on the other? If a person does not know or have the capacity due to some mental or neurological condition about what one ought to do, which is the purview of ethics, and or what is the right thing to do, which is the purview of morals, does that absolve the person from accountability? Whether we define that accountability with respect to legal liability or personal liability. Alternately, what if mental illness and unethical immoral behavior overlay each other? If an illegal or aberrant act occurs as a result of mental illness, does that act subject a person to accountability or not? And or to what degree? Now here are some examples that I pulled from Psychology Today, and it's important that I specify the date. This is from June 18th, 2019. Remember that when I give you these examples. An employer believes he is a fair and equitable supervisor, yet due to distorted black and white thinking, he idealizes several employees and devalues others. When a disgruntled employee is tired of being treated poorly and asks for a transfer, the person acts out in rage and anger and revenge. He contacts the employee's potential new supervisor and sabotages the employee's attempt to transfer. Now keeping the person under his thumb, he continues to passive-aggressively punish the employee. Number two, or say a person forgets his wife's birthday. Confronted with the realization that there is no way to deflect accountability, he employs a victim stance, saying, "You didn't remind me. All I do is work to support you, so no wonder I forgot. I worked so hard for you. I don't have time to remember anything." Or consider Tour de France, athlete Lance Armstrong, and his reaction to the scandal that stripped him of his winning titles. This in an interview with Oprah Winfrey. Armstrong begins, "I'm a flawed character. Did it feel wrong?" "No," Armstrong answered. "Did you feel bad about it?" "No," he said. "Did you feel in any way that you were cheating?" "No. I looked up the definition of cheating, and the definition is to gain an advantage on a rival or foe. I didn't view it that way. I viewed it as leveling, making sure I had a level playing field." Or consider these names: Bill Cosby, Tanya Harding, Joseph McCarthy, Steve Jobs, O.J. Simpson. So thank you for enduring that lengthy opening. And what I want to do is offer it up to you. How would you like to respond with respect to the question? what is the interplay between mental health and moral, ethical accountability? We're going to have, I don't know if we have another microphone, but
Yeah.
we do. Is somebody going to run that?
Somebody will need to jump up and do that.
Okay, we have a volunteer. Okay, who would like to start? Have we solved the issue? Thank you, Bruce. Yes, ma'am, over here.
I'll get up. I or triple the poly.
Hi, I'm Pat Everhart. Actually, that's a very difficult question. That's probably why nobody raised their hand to respond to it. And it leads to another question, is it also like a generational question, like morals and ethics, are they different today than they were 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or whatever? And the definition of mental illness. Now, I don't know here, but when they closed down all the mental institutes due to the terrible conditions, what did we do with those people who were there that were supposedly diagnosed with mental illness, and how many of those people went in there because somebody wanted them in there and not out in public? And then that goes to the question of how many mentally ill people are in prisons and really need treatment more than they need confinement. And basically I'm raising, I think, a lot more questions, because having taken some moral and ethics classes, a lot of people look at it differently. I can give an example of, in one of my classes, you have a woman from the 1950s, and her brother is being raised by supposedly the mother, but it turned out that the sister was really the mother and was sent away to have the child, and mom or grandma took the child as her own. Is that immoral that the child never knew the truth of his birth? He didn't know who his mother was. Now, in philosophy, in moral ethics, they would say that was wrong, because you started out with a lie, and you're living a lie, and the lie is unethical and immoral. So was the mother morally right or wrong in trying to do the best for their child? And was it the best? Because now you have a lie, and when do you correct the lie? It's like with adoption. When do you correct the lie that I am your mother, and you are the mother, but you're not the biological mother? So I think what the question is we have a quandary, because, like with Eichmann, what he did was immoral, but yet we found out, due to the experts, that he was of sound mind. But then we have to say, well, is it the experts, the psychologists, I should say, of someone who's of sound mind, or should it be the actions that decide if they are of sound mind?
Thank you for that. Response. I should add one other thing, is that our morals and ethics aren't just to be brought into question with respect to history. I'll give you one of the most gruesome and poignant cases. For example, in Jakarta now, the castration of little girls when there is perfectly legal. What a horrid notion that is, and yet we don't consider that to be moral and ethical or legal in our country. And so do we in our country have the right to judge people in Jakarta who practice that as being immoral and unethical. My response is, heck yeah, absolutely, no question. That doesn't impose any, that doesn't mean that I have the right to do anything overtly about that, but certainly we can pass moral and ethical judgments on others. With respect to jail, I'd like to remind you of an issue that happened back in the 1980s under the Reagan administration. That is that the promise was made, the Reagan administration said, what we need to do is we need to get a lot of the Vietnam vets who are in psychiatric institutes out of those and get them back into the population. And what we'll do is we'll set up the halfway houses, and so that they'll have a transition back into the general population. So they emptied the psychiatric hospitals, forgot about the halfway houses. And that's when the huge influx of street people started arriving in major, well, all over the country. Between 1985 and 1990, I was serving a church in Waltham, Massachusetts. When I got there, took the church in '85. Our church was serving about 7 people per day, 24/7, all year long. When I left in 1990, we were serving over 200 a day. 200 a day by one little church. And most of our guests were Vietnam vets. And the attitude of a lot of the public was, get a hold of your life. Stop drinking yourself into oblivion. You only have yourself. It didn't, post-traumatic syndrome didn't affect everybody. Why should it affect you? Get a hold of your life. So I don't know if that's not an argument, that's just an ask. I had a hand up over here, I think.
Vanessa Hunter. Then how can, if we think that genital mutilation of young girls is immoral and unethical, then how do we rationalize the mutilations of little boys' foreskin?
What?
How do we rationalize the mutilation of baby boys' foreskin?
Well, I don't know how we rationalize that, but I feel for the most part their sexual activity or their sexual pleasure, whereas it most certainly does for little girls and for women.
Good afternoon, sir. Gordon Black. As I grow older, I'm interested in the first part of Pat's question. Those of us coming from the 40s are the folkways and moorways by which we grew up no longer applicable as we enter 2019, 2018, because I personally am having an awful lot of trouble using my ethical standards against some of the folks with whom I have to deal with.
I think Pat Keith had her hand up.
Is there an answer to that?
I do understand that, but the question is, does the moral and ethical principle hold, or is it the conditions and the mores? That's the word I'm after. The mores of our current social situation, social, political, interpersonal relationship. I mean, it can be something as what I'll call benign as relationships with our neighbors. I don't know any of my neighbors, having lived in my neighborhood for 2 years now. I don't know them. That's unthinkable back from when I was a little boy in the 50s and 60s. That just wouldn't happen. I knew everybody knew everybody else's business, and now it's considered meddling. So I do see that shift, but I would ask, do you think that alters the moral and ethical landscape? In general, I would say no. and moral, ethical, and legal principles that are that shape the texture and the quality of our society and culture, as contrasted with full plays. And I think sometimes we do tend to mix up those moral, ethical principles with full plays.
Hi, Jackie. I think there's another factor here that we need to talk about in relation to morals and ethics and standards, and that is injustice. Because I think that what we're hearing from certain legal corners and certain government officials is that they're relying on a definition of sanity or mental illness that may or may not be applicable to a situation. If I hear that one more time that that mass murders can be chalked up to mental illness, I think I'll scream, because I think that that's only partly true, and there are, it's used as a sort of an escape from dealing with the situation of mass murders or unexpected attacks. So I think that our current definition of sanity maybe needs to be changed, and if so, how do we think we want to do that? And how does all this affect the justice that we seek?
Well, what do we do? How do you judge the person who is a public figure who lies and prevaricates without exception, and that person, first of all, that person who doesn't see any reason that he or she should be held accountable for that? And what do you do? How do you respond to those people who simply let it slide? No less than, say, seeing bully behavior exerted against another person and just say, well, that's not my business. I'm going to let it go. How do you respond to that? Is that what if that person has a narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder? What if that person has one or both of those disorders? They do cross. They do cross. And is that person to be held accountable for actions that he or she may commit that have a profoundly negative effect on other people? If the personality defect is there, is that person accountable?
Yes. Let me just say this. Okay, that person should be held accountable. Unfortunately, that's not happening. Now, one of the interesting shows is called "What Would You Do?" I rarely watch it, but what they're looking for are people willing to hold others accountable. And on that show, they show people are. But when it comes to a public figure, all of a sudden, because we agree with this or we disagree with that, we're afraid to do that. So, and it's also true if we're in an environment like this and we see somebody doing something that they shouldn't do, like, teasing somebody, bullying somebody, what's one of our reactions today because of this is that person going to have a gun and shoot me? Is he going to have a knife and hurt me? Is he going to start screaming at me and slapping me? I mean, there's also the fear of being personally attacked when you hold somebody accountable. And the other thing, if you don't mind my addressing,
Please.
and I'm going to do this. Okay, you talk about you don't know your neighbors. Many of us don't know who we're sitting with because we're on the freaking texting while we're having dinner. And also many of us, not us because we're all brought up, okay, we get these social media messages and bullying because you don't face the person is so much easier to do on here, and that's why you see suicides because they just can't take it anymore. It's 24 hours a day, and my position is social media is going to destroy democracy, and Putin says free speech is going to destroy you in this age. Thank you. Now sit down.
Thank you, Pat.
Hi, I'm Ellie Clay.
Hi, Ally.
I think we have to try to start at the beginning.
Ally, could you hold your microphone just a
Oh,
little bit?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I always want to move it far away.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we start at the beginning, you know, children are not born with an ethical or a moral sense within them. They acquire this from their parents, and this is called the superego, or the conscience. So a child adopts the standards of behavior that his parents teach him. So this can be a whole variety of things, and no two people have the same parent. They don't get the same lessons. So people have different contents of their conscience, and this makes them various. Actually, I think that this initial understanding of morality undergoes a transformation later when a child reaches an age of reason and can look at the things that he has been told and has learned in his early childhood and decide which of these he wants to continue and which he wants to discard. And so he begins to form his own standards of behavior. I think all of these ways in which we bring up our children determine what kind of society we have, what kind of standards we have to live up to. And besides having these individual standards, there is also the standard of the whole society, which is being inculcated into people from the time they're young. And sometimes this is in conflict, what they're receiving from their parents and from their teachers. It's all a difficult problem, and this is only treating the people whose brain development is such that they are able to process things in the way that the majority of people do. And there are a lot of people who are born that are different from the majority, and they have to, they don't have the ability to do things in the same way that everybody else does. And this is part of the responsibility of the whole society, is to look after one another. It's a very difficult thing, but none of us can say, I'm not responsible, I don't have to hold myself up to a standard.
Okay.
I am going to allow this to be something that
Okay.
we all do together to fix this problem.
Thank you. I have two responses to that. First is the work of a real brief review of the work of Jean Piaget and Lawrence Kohlberg, in which Kohlberg elicits three general levels of moral and ethical reasoning. The first one is egocentric or hedonistic. I want what I want for myself, and that's it. The second level is rules and laws. Okay, you make all of your moral and ethical decisions according to external rules and laws. And as you said, the third level, or to reflect on what you said a few moments ago, the third level is self-actualized principles. We wouldn't have any problem with understanding an infant, a young child, making his or her decisions according to what's in his or her self-interest. The child doesn't say, the infant doesn't say, Mother, Father, I'll be happy to eat and poop when we can work out an agreement. We would definitely have a problem with an adult who takes that same position. We call them psychopaths, right? Who don't come to understand or abide by the general rules and laws of a culture and society, right? But what about the person who cannot advance beyond the rules and laws towards self-actualized principles? Well, guess what? Most people can't. The vast majority of adults in our culture and society make their moral and ethical decisions according to external rules and laws and not according to internal principles. That's a fact. That's not debatable. What do we call the person? What do we make of the person who can't advance beyond rules and laws to self-actualized principles? Okay, so Beth has a heart attack right now. And we throw her in the back of my car to take her to Monroe, and the speed limit says 40 miles an hour. I'm going to obey that law, Beth. Meanwhile, you're dead, but at least I haven't broken the law. I mean, of course, that's an absurd argument, but on a larger, rounder way, that's how most people operate. And the reason that they don't, if you don't mind my going back to the bullying example, the reason that they don't step into to defend the person who's bullied and confront the bully is because they don't have well-rounded and mature and developed sense of self-actualized principles. My other response to what you brought up, and I thought it was great what you said, is that the research is showing, and it's really leaning in this direction, that most people who have narcissistic personality disorders and antisocial personality disorders, that it is a genetic, that it may have, it's leaning towards that there is a genetic cause for it. Now, if you ask me to name the gene or something like that causes it, of course I can't. But that's the leaning. Sure, we are born with a tabula rasa, a white tablet with respect to our morals and ethics. But what if we're born with a genetic condition that predisposes us towards aberrant mental health in general, and or possibly illegal, immoral, and unethical acts? What if we're born that way? Are we accountable? And to what degree? And how should the society respond? Were you going to speak? Would you let us bring you a microphone, please? Thank you.
My name is Jane Bauer.
Hi, Jane.
And I'm reacting to what we're saying, or what you're saying about accountability from a mental. Okay, I'm coming from social consciousness and our awareness now what neuroscience is teaching us. Just as you were I think you were making that suggestion that there are people born with certain personalities that are predisposed. Yet, we now know, or not that we know, I'm sorry, that's overstating. We hope that that we're finding ways to teach children at a very young age how to manage their behavior. So, what do we do in the interim between the time that this appears to be happening, at least I have hope for it, I think many of us do, and where we are today, talking about morals and ethics in a way that is the older generation way of thinking about it. So that's my question.
What do you
How
mean
do
by-
we bridge it?
I need to ask you, what do you mean the older generation's way of dealing with morals and ethics? I'm not sure that I know what that.
Well, I'm hearing morals and ethics more in the sense of the way it's been, talking about our history and, think about the Nazis and, what happened. I can't judge that at this point in my life. I mean, I judge it as it's very sad that it happened, but it did happen. And we have to live with that. Now we need to make it different and better. So, if we just focus on how it was, then I think I was feeling very confused initially when we were bringing this up, and then I finally realized that your title told me what you were here to speak about, and I guess I just didn't pick it up. So I guess I'm just saying that I think we have to look at the transition that we're in. We're in a big transition. Technology is taking us places that I certainly never could ever believe we were going. This is like science fiction.
Well, think about that from the perspective, say, not something on the scale that's different from the mass murder of people during the 30s and 40s of the previous century. But look back at that same time from the 30s and 40s, the 50s, the 60s, with respect to racism. That's a long time ago. Well, it's here now too, and so the moral and ethical questions are not simply that they're old-fashioned, because they still reside with us. Do they not? Go ahead, please.
Okay.
I'm trying to pick a fight.
I didn't mean to refer to it as old-fashioned. It was the way it was.
Historic.
It was how people lived in that moment. We are now in a new moment.
Dealing with this-
We're constantly moving.
And dealing with the same issues.
Yes. And, well, so that, that would be, we are still dealing with many of the same issues. So how do we go about doing it differently?
So was the slave owner, the racist, the two, and people who a long time ago mistreated, were the United States government people who locked up so many people of Japanese descent, were they mentally ill?
No. That, they were,
How could anybody who did something like that not be mentally ill?
It was fear. It was fear makes us all the time.
Okay.
okay, we have this
Go ahead, Bill.
Try.
Looking at the commandment bill caps, looking at the title here, responsibility, accountability, and in medicine, the types of things we call mental illness is very broad. I mean, it can vary, as you mentioned, personality disorders, to things that are reactive like depressions, to more serious illnesses like schizophrenia, where people are no longer in contact with reality. And when I was admitting people to the state hospital years ago, the criteria was they were a danger to themselves or others, or by virtue of their inability to distinguish reality from fantasy, they were no longer able to be cared for in a public, in the general population. Well, if you think somebody is that crazy, you might think that would excuse them. But in law, the standard for excuse is called the McNaught rule. And it has two prongs. And the first prong is that because of the insanity, the person is no longer able to appreciate the nature of his act, or that that act is wrong. Second prong, or he has an impulse for which he cannot resist. That is even a more narrow part of craziness that we would say insanity characterizes. So, as far as excuse is concerned, you know, the law itself is not very kind to people who are.
We'll take the case of a person with in the DSM-4, one of the markers, if you want to call it that, of a person with a narcissistic personality disorder was killing animals, just for fun or for whatever reason the person does that. Okay? Take the captain of a slave boat, a slave ship, who, say, starts out with 120 and presumes that he will lose 30% of the cargo in the process of bringing those who've been captured to be slaves here in America. How could anybody do that? How could anybody do that and consider that to be business alone? How can anybody do that and not be mentally ill, or have twisted thinking, or aberrant, something's messed up within the person's formation? Or has that person had social imprinting placed on him or her to such a degree that those fundamental understandings of grace and kindness and love and compassion simply are set aside?
Yeah, hi, I'm Teddy Laurie. I think one of the things is by dehumanizing those people. If cargo are not human beings, then it doesn't matter. If in World War II, Jewish people were not considered Jews or were not considered people, then it doesn't matter what happens to them. And I think with history, if we see a pattern of history that led to horrific things, then we need to see and make sure that when we see a pattern repeated, we do something.
So I feel very strongly that the one way that we make changes, and there are some that we cannot change because of their mental status, but I think it starts with our children. So I agree 100%. In today's society, when we talk about how we all grew up, the majority of us, with two parents, where teachers were respected, where if I got in trouble at school, then I was getting in trouble at home. Today, we have so many children from single-parent homes, with that single parent working 2 to 3 jobs. So that responsibility of teaching that moral, ethical well-being that we were all taught at home now lies in the hands of our educators in a very large way. Now, not all children are that way. Thank goodness my grandchildren and my children didn't have that. But we have children that come to school on a daily basis, and you know what children grow up with becomes their norm. Children that are tucked away in a closet and fed 3 times a day, that's their norm. They think everybody lives like that. So when children come to school and they come from so many different environments, they're not ready to learn the anger that comes to our children, but that comes from their environment. So what we're trying to do in the school system is we recognize that is a problem, that all of our children come to us with so much more baggage than we came to school on a regular basis. So being able to recognize that and work individually with those children. And I will tell you, one of the things that is beginning to happen, and I call it the kindness curriculum, because that is what it is that our children are being taught how to be kind to each other. I was at Legacy Elementary yesterday, and I try to visit schools on a pretty regular basis. And there was a child who appeared to be upset, and what I saw was another child that really didn't appear to know the child go over, put his arm around this little boy and say, "Are you okay?" We now have buddy benches for when children are feeling down. They sit on the buddy bench, and I've witnessed children sitting with them. So I think the world is so angry right now, and I don't think we're going to change the adults, but we can change our children. We can change our children. What we can do as adults is be mentors and role models for those children, because that's how this world is going to change. We can't change the narcissistic adult personality, but I'm a firm believer that we can teach that narcissistic child to be kind. What a message. If everybody was kind, what kind of world would we have?
Beth, one question.
Go ahead.
We'd love to do that. I would love to do that personally as an individual. It is like going through hell with gasoline underwear on to get into the school system to be a mentor to someone. I cannot. Tom Butler doesn't help. We can't go talk to the high school students that are at that place where they can make that decision. And we have that ethic that we would like to instill upon them. Prom is not necessarily the night you think it is, for example. You go out there and you're courteous to the young lady you're taking. You're kind to her. You buy the proper flower for her based on something. We have kids that come up to me, they don't know what a cufflink is. They don't know what stays are. They don't know what the buttons are for. Nobody's teaching them. And the teacher can't do it all. But I'm telling you, we're having trouble getting into the school system to do it.
We'll deal with that issue.
Yeah.
But I want to, my objective is to stay on target with a little time. I don't know how long this is supposed to go, so somebody can. Okay. Let's go back and have a look at let me see if I can build a moral and ethical legal comparison, mental health comparison. The young men who broke into Columbine High School and caused all those terrible deaths, and the other occasions in which there have been school shootings. What do you make of that behavior? Do you think that those young men have some sort of mental defect or something like that? Or were they perfectly sane? What do you think?
I don't think we know.
It's that thought, there but for the grace of God go I. And I think people are born with special wiring. And that wiring doesn't get set off until the environment flips that switch on that wiring. So you can have a child with the angry gene, you can have two children, and you raise one in an Amish community, and you raise one in a slum, and you're going to get two different results from that child, and they're both capable, but put in the right environment, they will express that totally different.
Okay, let's take the case, that same case. Let's say that those young men had not been killed as a result of they committed suicide. They committed suicide. Let's say that they hadn't, and they had appeared before, they'd been captured, taken to jail, and examined by psychologists and psychiatrists and forensic psychiatrists, who, at the end of the day, judged that they were mentally incapable of being, that they were, it's not for that person to make the judgment, that's up to a jury, or a grand jury, or a judge, depending on how it comes down, I think. But says these young men didn't have control of themselves. Now, to what degree do we hold them accountable? Are they accountable to begin with? Are they accountable? Yes. Well, how can you hold them accountable if they didn't have control of themselves? Well, this is Socratic, right? That's all I'm doing. I'm not taking a position. I'm testing the thought. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh, turned off the microphone.
Hello.
There we go.
They are responsible. Now, you're addressing why they behave that way. The question here is, have they committed it? Whatever crime. It is a crime. They killed them. Now, what caused that is another issue.
Hold the microphone close to your mouth, please.
What caused the problem is another issue. It's not really whether this is a crime or not, whether they are responsible or not. They are responsible.
Sure, right.
So now, if you're addressing the question, what do we do with these people, that's another issue altogether. That depends on the society. In some societies, they will be very understanding and very lenient in their treatment. If that was committed in Holland or in Switzerland, they will probably go to jail for 5 or 8 or 10 years and get out of there within 5 years. If it happens here, I don't know in which state, but in some states, they may never get out. They may die in jail or be murdered by somebody in jail. So the question here is, what are we trying to address? Are we trying to address, is this moral? Well, I take the position, for instance, my personal opinion is that we are all perfectly clean sheets when we are born. And our parents, including us with our children, mess up those kids. By our behavior, by our thoughts, by whatever. It's not society here and there. It is individual examples that inculcate on these kids a specific behavior, specific reactions. And who knows, those kids might have been, the kids who went to Columbine might have been perfectly sane, and something triggered them to act that way. I don't know what happened 24 hours before they acted that way, but something caused it.
Yes, sir. Well said. And then, and you touched on another issue that as it moves along, what about the treatment? What about the treatment of prisoners? The ways that they were treated, as we observed here in our area at the Lowell, the Lowell prison, the treatment of the women at the Lowell prison. How could any person treat people like that unless there was something fundamentally, morally, ethically, mentally messed up? You can see my ability to use the jargon in the mental health field probably speaks volumes. But how could anybody treat another person like that unless he or she were in some way mentally deranged?
Oh boy.
Hi, my name is Winston Sherman. Recent northerner who moved down here I lived about 6 miles from a very notorious Maryland prison called the Jessup Institute. In fact, it was so bad that the state of Maryland closed it down and dispersed the prisoners everywhere else. Because I lived so close, I also befriended some guards there, people that worked at this institute. A lot of them quit. They quit because they had souls, sir. They quit because of the deep humanity of it all. They could not treat their fellow human beings in a manner that the state wanted them to be treated.
State?
The state wanted them to be treated. And the environment. Because when you are in a situation and you are outnumbered, and sometimes you're outnifed by individuals that don't care about your safety, you have to take on a certain persona. And if you do that day in and day out, it will change you as an individual. It will darken your soul. So these individuals that beat this woman to within her life up at loud, they are not getting the type of oversight that they should be getting. They are not being rotated in and out. They're not getting breaks from their service. And something needs to be done about that. It could break anybody, even a good person. You know?
And if they are under that kind of stress, are they accountable?
So tell us what you think of as solutions.
Oh, I don't have solutions. I'm not here to offer an opinion or a solution.
Talk about this transition.
I can't hear you now. Could you say it again, please?
You talked about this transition from a legalistic approach to a more environmental or varied approach to how we react to these situations. How do we make this transition from one way of trying to deal with problems to the other?
Okay. Beth talked about that in glowing terms with respect to what we need to do to educate our children. I think we also need to educate. We may part on this point, but I think we can also educate our adults too. And we have to hold our adults. I heard, I was at a recent meeting of the Public Policy Institute where there's a possibility that PPI may address early childhood development and focus our attention in that direction. One of the points that was made that if a child can't learn by the time he or she is in the 3rd grade, that child is both very, very likely to run into terrible problems as an adolescent and teen. That's true. But stepping on to adults, I think for adults, one responsibility or opportunity for adults is to be a part of a community of faith. I'm not saying that's a panacea. Nothing, I hope I haven't offered any panaceas for any of these things. But I think to be a part of a community of faith. And that doesn't just mean to have religious ideas on a private basis. I mean to be in community and in covenant with other people. What is being a neighbor other than a type of covenant? What is seeing a bullying act and responding to it other than a covenant with a set of values, but also a sense of covenant to other people who are human beings. So I think one issue is to be in a community of faith that strives towards an understanding of higher morals and ethics on the self-actualized levels, and not just obeying dogmas and rituals and rules conjured up by a religious organization, but helping to foster self-actualized principles. That's one. The second is to be a part of the community in the political process, not just to leave it to others to try to work it out. Third, I think, is to hold our political representatives accountable for their behavior. They don't get a buy for aberrant behavior. Hold them accountable. How we do that is certainly with votes, but it's also being willing to I think about my own representatives, I use that term broadly, my own representatives who support by their silence racism, homophobia, and sexism, those to just to name three. Because of their silence, these things are allowed to fester and grow, and they don't call them into check. So there's three ideas that I have. What are yours?
So what is the way we
Well, they've got another question. Somebody else is speaking. Go ahead, ma'am.
Clarissa Heron.
Hi, Clarissa.
Well, I want to say, Reverend, the foundation definitely is our belief spiritually, because evil has been here forever. If we go back and read our Bible, it's there. And they sacrifice kids, just different things. If you go and read Psalms 106, you'll see the evil that's perpetuated back then and even so as now. But to address education and teaching our young children, we can turn them around. And it starts in our homes, in our environments. We talk about neighbors, community works, networking. Those are the things that we are to do. And if we cannot get into the schools, let's go to some of the communities. Let's find where our children are. My daughter, one of them, she shared something with me this morning. She was a CNA at a rehab facility. And she was telling me how evil some of the CNAs are. And that's what I'm going to call it, because it is. It's evil when you can hurt someone for no cause. They're there to be cared for, and you can hurt them. That's evil. And my daughter said that how she witnessed certain ones, how the residents would not use the bathroom because a lot of the CNAs would not properly care for them, but allow their poop to sit there right in the room, or move it from the room and sit it in the hall. How shameful for the patient who's there. And now, of course, she's not going to call the CNAs. And they allowed this kind of foolishness to be perpetuated in these places. Well, my daughter said to me, she said, Mom, she said, you know, there were times, she said, that it was very challenging when I had to clean somebody repeatedly. She said, you know what I had to do, Mom? She said, I prayed. I would pray in that instance, and I would say, God, help me, because this lady cannot help this. She's here for me to care for her. And I had to take that same stance when I was into child development. I got my credentials in child development, early child development. And when I got to a place where I saw that I was no more good use to my children, I knew it was time for me to step down. So we, in our good consciousness, and even in our parental trainings, we are to train, we are to teach from love. And I like that, the kindness curriculum that you're talking about, because as educators and doctors and lawyers and judges, we take oaths to serve our people. For those who do wrong, yes, they are to be held accountable. Law takes care of that. And I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Other responses? I didn't have this up.
How, what about willful rationalization? You're saying, a person is saying, and they can choose this or they can choose this. And they willfully choose the lower road. Where does that fit in?
Well, I thought about addressing that. That's the global question within which we address the more narrow. I felt like I needed to narrow it a little bit. But you're right. What about the person who just simply willfully does the wrong thing? And he or she knows that it's the wrong thing to do. Is that your point?
I mean, what are they ignoring? It's got to be a conversation going on somewhere.
I agree. What do you do about that? And is that an immoral act? does it, but back to my question of how we began this, is that person, does that willfully choosing to do the wrong thing, does that reflect some sort of mental or emotional aberration? Sure. Well, they can get away with it.
They create a story that doesn't make that.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marianne Malama. First of all, I want to sincerely compliment everyone who is here. Thank you for attending. God bless every one of you sincerely. Bottom line is, in a short time we'll be walking out. How about if we end like this? I heard so many good ideas. Oh, so many doors are open. Bottom line is, I am responsible for my own actions. I have accountability. I want to give a thank you for your stories. A quick story of how my own life was affected. Particularly how I love to watch What Would You Do? And I go, oh my God, I need to shape up. Oh wow. You know, all of us, because we become aware. 2 years ago, I was at the Publix and I came out and there was a note on, I put my groceries in the truck and there was a note on my windshield. And I see nobody else has one. And I read it and it says, I am so sorry I hit your car in the back. Here is my insurance company. Here's the policy number. Here's the telephone and here's the agent's name. I quickly got out of the car and I went to the back and I saw a little thin line of white in the corner. I went and I got some Kleenex and spit it off. Oh my God, it came off. It was like nothing. So then I got home and I called the number. Because she just, I didn't know if it's a man or woman, there just was a number. And I called and I said, hello, my name is Marianne Melema, and I'm the individual that you hit the car. And she, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. So I'll get to the bottom line. And I said to her, first of all, ma'am, what is your name? And she said, Cynthia. I said, Cynthia, how is it that you were motivated to put all of that information knowing that your insurance policy will go up and blah, 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 blah? And she said, you know what? It was the right thing to do. And I went, oh my God. And from that, I asked her, we met at a restaurant, and today she's my darling friend. So bottom line is, we are all accountable for our actions. We learn from each other. You're right, religion, she's a Jehovah's Witness. And I said, does your religion really that strong? And she says, oh yes.
Thank you, Maya.
I'd like to just say another word about what Beth was talking about earlier about young children and how we have to get to them early. Not only do we have to, not only do we teach them what morals and ethics and right and wrong as teachers now, along with parents and hopefully as parent partners, but also another critical issue is that we can identify children, very young children, who have the predisposition to have behavior which has no conscience. And I know this for a fact. I have seen a number of children over the years, as young as 3 or 4 years old, who act in such a way to let you know that they have no conscience, that nothing, they have no remorse when they hit another person or when they take a hammer and destroy something. And it's not that they're bad children. They don't have what it takes within them to make that judgment. And if you can identify those children early enough, you can do something about it. You can help. But the resources are few. Our guidance counselors are spread too thin. Our teachers are at their wits' end
teaching all the subjects they have to do. So what do we put our money where our mouths are and do more with early childhood education? It's been a critical issue for as long as I've been in the education career, and that's a long time. But thank you, Hal. And I do think we do need to redefine sanity.
Hey, I'm Sheila Arnett. As running for school at not against Becky. As we all know, this is the week of the anniversary of 9/11, and I know we all remember exactly where we were on that day. And I saw something on social media. It talks about, I want our life back that we had on 9/12 of 2001. We were all nice, and we held the door open, and we were praying for one another, and we were checking on one another. Social media, by the way, Facebook didn't exist in 2001, which I think Facebook is the best thing and the worst thing ever invented ever. And I thought about even this time in 2017, we were all reeling from Irma, and we were doing the same thing, checking on our neighbors. We went down the street, our neighbor had a tree fall. We went down and helped them, clean up the yard. Labor Day weekend this year, we're all watching out for one another. We're watching Dorian. Is it going to come? We're praying for the Bahamas. And as soon as Dorian gets past the Florida-Georgia line, we're back on Facebook being mean and nasty and hateful to one another. So I think that's one thing every one of us can do every day. Be nice. Be nice to one another. Hold the door open for someone. So, great talk. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Luis Isaza, and I just wanted to make a general comment very, very briefly when we deal or talk about solutions for this kind of problems. Moral responsibility and ethical principle, we know that's really the main responsibility of the families, schools, maybe the faith community to teach those. In society, we have to have some kind of rules by which we can live together and respect each other. But also then, we have a criminal justice system that has to be just. And the solution that we have found to take care of a lot of these problems has been in the treatment courts, which are separate from the regular criminal justice system. And it's very, very important to know that these courts exist, because in there we have family courts, we have drug courts, we have mental health courts, we have veterans courts, and in these courts they treat people considering the why they commit an offense and what led them to do whatever they did wrong. These courts come to or bring to us a different phase of the regular justice system, and they use all the professionals that have to do with human behavior. So I'm more familiar with the Veterans Court because I work with the veterans. When a veteran commits a considered criminal offense, he doesn't go to the regular criminal justice system if he is approved to be in the Veterans Court, and there he has a special help and treatment that he doesn't have in the other courts. That's where mental health is so important, and where mental health comes to the fore of why things were done. We have the resources, and we should know about it, because we shouldn't be treating or talking about mental illness, rather mental wellness, and how to combat the stigma of mental illness.
Thank you, Luis.
we have one more candidate amongst us that we wish to acknowledge. Barbara Feitos.
Thank you very much.
Running for mayor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. It's wonderful to be here. Such a marvelous, marvelous, marvelous conversation. We are hitting the ground running in this last weekend before the run-up to the election, which is on Tuesday, September 17th. We have some wonderful 30-second spot videos out there. There is a very personal 2-minute video being posted right now this afternoon, and we would wonderfully ask that those of you that see it, share it and share it widely, because what is going to make a difference is going to be the voter turnout. I'm very, very encouraged by what the analytics are showing, that people are excited about this election. It's going to make a difference. Mrs. Rich is retiring, and her seat is open for District 2, and so the citizens of District 2, especially the residents of District 2, want to have a voice in who will be their representative going forward after Mary's illustrious 24-year career as their representative. So again, that will enhance turnout, but that is going to be the key. From everything that we have seen is going to be the voter turnout. So encourage all of those of you that do live in the city limits, those of you that have family, friends, and colleagues that would live in the city limits if you do not. That is going to make the biggest difference of all. So look for some sign waivers over the weekend, look for some sign waivers Monday and Tuesday, and we're going to do this. Thank you all for your support.
Before Delphine, be sure to leave something for your waiter, your waitress.
Yes, absolutely. We want you to be able to use this. First of all, I want to echo what Maya said. We thank each and every one of you, because each and every person here is showing their commitment to the common good. And we thank Hal for suggesting, for coming and doing this. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
The next Friday forum is October 11th. It will be freelance writer, a distinguished local educator, John Dunn, who's just published another book called Drying Out, which addresses the decline of, well, our responsibility towards the environment, and particularly the water environment. I'm talking about morals and ethics. Water is right up there with the rest of it. Thank you very, very much. And also read the acknowledgement to Nancy Newman, one of the great ladies in the history of Marion County.